The dust had settled into Evelyn Sullivan's bones the same way grief had settled into her heart, and when the stranger asked her why she never smiled, she told him flatly that she had forgotten how a long time ago. It was the summer of 1878 in Yuba City, California, and the heat shimmered off the dirt roads like water that would never quench anyone's thirst. Evelyn stood behind the counter of her late father's general store, tallying numbers in a ledger with hands that moved mechanically, efficiently, without joy. She was 24 years old and felt ancient. The store smelled of tobacco, leather, and the faint sweetness of dried fruit in barrels. 3 years had passed since her father died of pneumonia. 2 years since her younger brother was trampled by a spooked horse, and 1 year since her mother simply gave up and passed in her sleep. The Sullivan family plot on the hill overlooking town now held 3 graves, and Evelyn tended them every Sunday with the same blank expression she wore while measuring out flour or counting change. The bell above the door chimed, and she glanced up to see a man she did not recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of aged whiskey. His dark brown hat sat low on his head, and dust covered his boots and the legs of his worn denim trousers. A cattle driver, she guessed, or a ranch hand passing through. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Afternoon, madam," he said. His voice was deep and carried the rough edges of someone who spent more time talking to horses than people. "Afternoon," Evelyn replied, her tone neutral. "What can I help you with?" He walked to the counter with an easy gait, glancing around the well-stocked shelves. "Need some supplies. Tobacco, coffee, dried beef if you have it. Maybe some ammunition for a Winchester." She nodded and began gathering the items, moving through the store with practiced efficiency. He watched her, and she could feel his gaze like a physical weight. Most men in town had stopped looking at her that way. They saw her as the Sullivan girl, the one touched by too much tragedy, the one who ran the store with grim determination and never laughed at anyone's jokes. "You are mighty serious for someone so young," he said as she set the items on the counter. Evelyn's hand stilled for just a moment. "I am as serious as life requires me to be." "That's so." He leaned against the counter, and she caught the scent of sage and leather. "Life require you to never smile." She met his eyes directly, her own gray ones flat and emotionless. "I forgot how to smile a long time ago. Some things, once lost, cannot be found again." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his mouth, a spark of determination in those whiskey eyes. "Now that is a sad thing to hear. A woman like you ought to have reasons to smile every day." "And a stranger ought to mind his own business," she said, but there was no real bite in her words. She was too tired for anger. He smiled then, slow and genuine. "Name is Thomas Vaughn. Most folks call me Tom. I just hired on at the Patterson Ranch about 5 miles north of here." "Reckon you will be seeing a lot of me, Miss Sullivan. Evelyn Sullivan." She calculated his total and told him the amount. He paid in silver coins, his calloused fingers brushing hers as he dropped them into her palm. "Well, Miss Sullivan, I am going to make it my mission to remind you how to smile again." He said it with such casual certainty that she actually blinked in surprise. "That is a fool's mission," she replied. "Maybe so, but I have been called a fool before and I am still standing." He gathered his supplies, tipped his hat again, and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. Evelyn stood alone in the quiet store, her hand still warm where his fingers had touched hers, and told herself that Thomas Vaughn would give up on his ridiculous mission within a week. Men like him did not understand that some souls were too broken to mend, but he came back the very next day. Not for supplies this time, but with a reason so thin it was nearly transparent. He needed her opinion on which tobacco blend was better for a particular pipe. She raised an eyebrow at the question but answered it anyway, and he lingered at the counter asking about the town, the best place to get a hot meal, whether the saloon was worth visiting. She answered each question with the minimum words necessary, but he did not seem discouraged by her terseness. On the third day he brought her wildflowers. They were a scraggly bunch, clearly picked from the fields between the ranch and town, nothing elegant or expensive. He set them on the counter between them like an offering. "Saw these and thought of you," he said simply. Evelyn stared at the flowers, yellow and purple blooms that seemed too cheerful for her dark store. "Why would wildflowers make you think of me?" "Because they are surviving out there in the heat and dust, blooming anyway even though nobody planted them or tends them. They are tougher than they look." His eyes held hers. "Reminds me of someone." She wanted to tell him to take his flowers and his flattery elsewhere, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she found herself reaching for an empty jar, filling it with water from the pitcher she kept for herself, and placing the flowers in it. She set the jar on the shelf behind the counter where she could see them while she worked. "Thank you," she said quietly, and something in his expression brightened. There now, that was not so hard, was it? Over the following weeks, Thomas Vaughn became a fixture in her days. He came to the store at least once every 2 days, sometimes with legitimate needs, sometimes with the flimsiest of excuses. He told her about his life, how he had been drifting from ranch to ranch since he was 17, working cattle drives and breaking horses. He was 27 now and had decided to settle somewhere long enough to save money, maybe buy his own land someday. He had grown up in Texas, lost his parents to cholera when he was young, been raised by an uncle who taught him everything about horses and nothing about staying in one place. Evelyn listened but shared little about herself at first. What was there to share except loss? But Thomas had a way of asking questions that slipped under her defenses, gentle and patient. He asked what her father had been like, and she found herself describing his booming laugh, the way he always gave hard candy to the children who came into the store. He asked about her brother, and she told him about the boy's dreams of becoming a lawyer, how he had been saving money to go to San Francisco for school. "They sound like good people," Thomas said. They were. Evelyn's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she folded a length of fabric for a customer's order. "And then they were gone, and I was alone." "You are not alone now," he said quietly. She looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life like the wildflowers he brought her, unexpected and persistent. "You will leave eventually. Everyone does." "What if I do not want to?" He leaned against the counter, his expression serious for once. "What if I found something here worth staying for?" Her heart did something strange in her chest, a flutter she had not felt in years. She turned away, busying herself with straightening already straight shelves. "You barely know me. Then let me know you better. Have dinner with me." "Not at the saloon, somewhere quieter. There is a little restaurant near the church that serves decent food. I cannot just close the store whenever I please. You close at 6 every day, I checked. Have dinner with me at 6:30. 1 hour of your time, Evelyn. If you hate every minute of it, I will stop pestering you." She turned back to face him, studying his open, honest face. Part of her wanted to say no, to protect herself from the inevitable pain of caring for someone who would leave or die or disappear like everyone else. But another part, a part she thought had died with her family, whispered that maybe, just maybe, she deserved one evening of something different. "One dinner," she agreed. "But I am not promising anything beyond that." His smile could have lit the whole store. "That is all I am asking." That evening, Evelyn changed from her plain work dress into something nicer, a blue cotton dress with small white flowers embroidered around the collar. Her mother had made it for her 3 years ago, and she had worn it exactly twice. She brushed out her long chestnut hair and pinned it up, then studied herself in the small mirror in her bedroom above the store. She looked younger somehow, less severe. It unsettled her. Thomas was waiting outside the store at exactly 6:30, cleaned up and wearing a shirt that looked freshly pressed. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked through town as the evening cooled, the oppressive heat finally releasing its grip. People noticed them together, and Evelyn could feel the curious stares, but Thomas seemed oblivious to them, pointing out a hawk circling overhead and telling her a story about a horse named Dusty who was afraid of chickens. The restaurant was small and plain, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who had come to California during the gold rush with her husband and stayed after he died in a mining accident. She served simple food, but it was hot and well prepared. Thomas ordered for both of them some kind of beef stew with fresh bread, and they ate while the conversation flowed more easily than Evelyn had expected. "Why did you really come to Yuba City?" she asked him over the meal. "There are ranches everywhere. Why here?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, tearing off a piece of bread and considering his answer. "Honestly, I was tired. Tired of moving, tired of never knowing where I would be in 6 months. I wanted to stop somewhere that felt right. I rode into town, saw the valley and the river, the mountains in the distance, and I thought, this is a place where a man could build something that lasts. And then you met a miserable woman in a general store and decided to take on a hopeless project." She said it lightly, but there was truth underneath. "I met a woman who had been hurt by life and was still standing, still fighting. That is not hopeless, Evelyn. That is strength. You just forgot that about yourself." He reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough and warm, and she did not pull away. "I see you. Not the grief, not the loss. I see you, and I think you are remarkable." Tears threatened, burning behind her eyes, and Evelyn fought them back. She had not cried in 2 years, not since her mother's funeral. She had promised herself she was done with tears, but Thomas's hand around hers felt like an anchor, something solid in a world that had been nothing but shifting sand. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered. "I do not know how to let someone in again. Then let me teach you. Same way I will teach you to smile again, one day at a time, one moment at a time." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "You do not have to be alone anymore, Evelyn, unless you want to be." "I do not want to be," she admitted, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at once. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and Thomas walked her back to the store as the stars began to appear overhead. At her door, he released her hand but stayed close, looking down at her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Never." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" "Tomorrow is Sunday. I visit the graves in the morning, and then the store is closed." "Can I come with you? To the graves, I mean. I would like to pay my respects to the people who made you who you are." Evelyn had never taken anyone to the cemetery with her. It was her private ritual, her time with her family. But the idea of Thomas standing beside her, his solid presence a comfort, did not feel like an intrusion. It felt like something she needed without knowing it. "Yes," she said. "Meet me here at 9." He kissed her forehead, a chaste and sweet gesture that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her. "Good night, Evelyn. Good night, Thomas." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his figure gradually disappearing, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something bloom inside her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but the possibility of hope, the potential for something other than endless gray days. That night, she dreamed of wildflowers and whiskey-colored eyes. Thomas arrived at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning with his hat in his hands and a respectful demeanor. Evelyn led him up the hill to where 3 headstones stood in neat rows under an oak tree. She had brought fresh flowers from her small garden behind the store, and she placed them carefully at each grave while Thomas stood silently beside her. "Father, this is Thomas Vaughn," she said softly, feeling only slightly foolish talking to stone markers. "He works at the Patterson Ranch. He has been very kind to me." She moved to the next grave. "Mother, I know you would like him. He has good manners and he makes me feel less alone." Finally, she knelt at her brother's grave. "Samuel, you would probably tease me about him, but I think you would approve." Thomas stepped forward and addressed the graves himself. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, Samuel, I want you to know I am going to take care of Evelyn. She is the finest woman I have ever met, and I consider it an honor to know her. You raised someone remarkable, and I promise to be worthy of her trust." Evelyn's throat tightened, and this time she could not stop the tears. They came silently, tracking down her cheeks as years of held-back grief finally found release. Thomas pulled her against his chest, his arms strong and steady around her, and let her cry without saying a word. He just held her while she shook with sobs, his hand stroking her hair, his heart beat solid under her ear. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back, wiping at her face with embarrassment. "I am sorry. I have not cried in so long I thought I was past it." "Grief does not work on a schedule," Thomas said gently. "And you have nothing to apologize for. Cry as much as you need. I am not going anywhere." They sat together under the oak tree, and Evelyn talked about her family in a way she had not been able to before. She told him stories, happy memories mixed with painful ones, and Thomas listened to all of it with complete attention. He asked questions, laughed at the funny parts, and looked appropriately solemn at the sad ones. It felt like introducing him to the people she loved most in the world, and by the time they left the cemetery, something had shifted inside her. The weight she carried felt slightly lighter. Over the following months, Thomas courted her with a steady determination that gradually wore down her walls. He came to the store every day he could, helped her with heavy shipments, fixed the loose board on the front step she had been meaning to repair for months. On Sundays, he took her on picnics by the Feather River, where they sat in the shade and talked about everything and nothing. He taught her to skip stones across the water, laughing when her first attempts plunked straight down. "You have to flick your wrist like this," he demonstrated, sending a flat stone bouncing 5 times across the surface. Evelyn tried again and this time managed 3 skips. "I did it." "You sure did." Thomas grinned at her, and then his expression changed, became more serious. "Evelyn, you are smiling." She touched her face in surprise, feeling the unfamiliar stretch of her lips, the lift of her cheeks. "I am. Prettiest thing I have ever seen," he said, and kissed her for the first time. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Evelyn melted into him. Her hands gripped his shoulders, and she kissed him back with 3 years of loneliness and longing pouring out of her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since the first day you told me you had forgotten how to smile. I want to spend every day reminding you of reasons to be happy." "I love you too," Evelyn whispered, and realized it was true. Somewhere between the wildflowers and the tears, between his steadfast presence and gentle patience, she had fallen completely in love with Thomas Vaughn. "I am terrified of losing you. You will not lose me. I am staying right here for as long as you will have me." He cupped her face in his hands. "Marry me, Evelyn. Let me take care of you. Let me be your family." She should have been cautious, should have waited longer, protected herself better. But caution had kept her isolated and miserable for 3 years, and she was tired of being afraid. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." His whoop of joy startled a flock of birds from a nearby tree, and he spun her around until she was laughing, actually laughing, the sound strange and wonderful to her own ears. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools, and Evelyn felt lighter than air. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church at the center of town. Evelyn wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and only slightly yellowed with age. Mrs. Chen and her daughter helped with the alterations, and several of the ranch hands from Patterson Ranch attended the ceremony. The owner of the ranch, Mr. Patterson himself, gave Evelyn away since she had no male relatives left. It was a simple ceremony, but when Thomas slipped a thin gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Evelyn felt wealthy beyond measure. They moved into the rooms above the store, which Evelyn had occupied alone for so long. Having Thomas, there transformed the space. His boots by the door, his hat on the peg, his body warm beside hers in bed at night. He woke early each morning to work at the ranch, but he came home to her every evening, and they ate dinner together while discussing their days. He told her about difficult horses and stubborn cattle, and she told him about customers and inventory. It was ordinary and domestic and absolutely perfect. As the months passed, Evelyn bloomed like the wildflowers Thomas had compared her to. Her smiles came easier now, and sometimes she even laughed freely, a sound that always made Thomas pause whatever he was doing to look at her with wonder. She started to reconnect with the community she had isolated herself from, joining the church ladies for their charity work, hosting a quilting circle in the store on Sunday afternoons. Life, which had seemed like something to simply endure, became something to enjoy. But old fears had deep roots, and sometimes in the dark of night, Evelyn would wake with her heart pounding, convinced that Thomas was dead beside her, that this happiness was another thing that would be ripped away. The first time it happened, she shook him awake with trembling hands, needing to see his eyes open to hear his voice. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, alert despite the late hour. "I thought you were dead. I had a dream and you were gone and I was alone again." Her voice broke on the last word. Thomas pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin. "I am right here. I am alive and I am not going anywhere. Feel my heartbeat, strong and steady. I am staying with you, Evelyn." "Everyone I love leaves," she whispered against his chest. "Not everyone. I am staying. I am going to grow old with you, have children with you, build a life with you. You are stuck with me for the next 50 years at least." He kissed the top of her head. "I know you are scared. After everything you have lost, I understand why. But you cannot let fear steal your joy. We have right now, this moment, and we have each other. That is real." She breathed in his scent, felt his solid warmth, and let his words settle into her bones. He was right. She could spend her entire life afraid of loss, or she could embrace what she had while she had it. She chose the latter. "I am sorry for waking you," she murmured. "Never apologize for needing me. That is what I am here for." He stroked her hair until she relaxed, and they fell back asleep tangled together. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers in the fields, and Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas over breakfast, watching his face carefully as he processed the news. For a moment, he just stared at her, and then a huge grin split his face. "A baby. We are having a baby." He came around the table so fast he nearly knocked over his chair, pulling her to her feet and spinning her gently. "Evelyn, that is wonderful. That is the best news I have ever heard." "You are happy?" she asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy does not cover it. I am over the moon. I am going to be a father. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach with such reverence it brought tears to her eyes. Our child, yours and mine. I am scared, she admitted. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose the baby? What if something happens to you and I have to raise a child alone? Thomas knelt in front of her, still holding her hands. Those things could happen. Life is uncertain, and we both know that better than most. But we could also have a healthy baby, and I could be the best father in California, and we could raise our child surrounded by love. We could have 50 years of happiness ahead of us. Do not borrow trouble from tomorrow, Evelyn. Be here, now with me, excited about our baby. She looked down at him, this man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who had made it his mission to teach her to smile again and succeeded beyond measure. All right, I am excited. I am terrified, but I am excited. That is my girl. He stood and kissed her softly. We are going to be wonderful parents. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Evelyn was sick for the first 3 months and could barely stand the smell of coffee. Thomas took over that part of the store's inventory, and he brought her peppermint tea every morning to settle her stomach. As her belly grew, he became even more attentive, insisting she sit down more often, hiring a boy from town to help with the heavy lifting in the store. Evelyn protested that she was pregnant, not dying, but secretly she loved his fussing. They spent evenings planning for the baby, turning the small storage room next to their bedroom into a nursery. Thomas built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving a simple pattern of flowers into the headboard. Evelyn sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands creating something for her future instead of just maintaining the past. Mrs. Chen and the other women in town threw her a small party, bringing gifts and advice in equal measure. Babies are easier than you think, Mrs. Patterson said, and harder than you think, all at the same time. Sleep when the baby sleeps, advised Mrs. Chen. Trust your instincts, said the schoolteacher, who had 5 children of her own. Evelyn absorbed all the wisdom, feeling more connected to these women than she had in years. She was part of a community again, not the tragic Sullivan girl, but Thomas Vaughn's wife, a woman with a future. The baby came on a cold January morning in 1880, after 12 hours of hard labor that left Evelyn exhausted and exhilarated. Thomas stayed with her the entire time, despite the midwife's suggestion that he wait elsewhere. He held Evelyn's hand, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, and told her she was doing beautifully, even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Evelyn cried tears of joy. Thomas cut the cord with shaking hands, and when the midwife placed the cleaned and swaddled baby in Evelyn's arms, they both stared at him in wonder. He is perfect, Thomas whispered. Look at him, Evelyn. We made that. Samuel Thomas Vaughn, Evelyn said, naming him after her brother and her husband. Hello, Samuel. We have been waiting for you. The baby's tiny hand wrapped around her finger, and Evelyn felt her heart expand in a way she had not thought possible. This was her son, hers and Thomas's, a piece of both of them combined into something entirely new. All her fears about losing him, about something going wrong, faded in the face of his very real presence. He was here, healthy and strong, and she loved him with a fierceness that took her breath away. Thomas kissed her forehead, then the baby's, his eyes wet with tears. Thank you for him. Thank you for trusting me, for taking a chance on us. You have given me everything, Evelyn. We gave each other everything, she corrected, and smiled at him, the expression coming as naturally now as breathing. They settled into the rhythms of parenthood, exhausting and wonderful in turns. Samuel was a good baby overall, sleeping in reasonable stretches and nursing well, but the nights were still long, and Evelyn was often bone tired. Thomas helped whenever he could, walking the floor with Samuel when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, rocking the cradle while Evelyn napped. They were a team, navigating this new territory together. As Samuel grew, he proved to be a happy child with Thomas's easy temperament and Evelyn's gray eyes. He laughed readily, smiled at everyone, and brought joy wherever he went. Customers at the store cooed over him, and Thomas carried him everywhere when he was not at the ranch, the baby strapped to his chest in a sling Evelyn had made. "You are going to spoil him," Evelyn said, watching Thomas dance around the kitchen with Samuel while humming a tuneless melody. "Children cannot be spoiled by love," Thomas replied. "Only by lack of discipline, and we will have plenty of that when he is older and needs it. For now, I am going to enjoy my son." One evening, when Samuel was 6 months old, Evelyn stood in the doorway watching Thomas play with the baby on the floor. Thomas was on his stomach, making faces that sent Samuel into peals of giggles, and the sight filled her with such profound happiness that she had to blink back tears. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, noticing her expression. "I am thinking about how you saved me," Evelyn said quietly. "I was drowning in grief, and you threw me a rope. You told me you would remind me how to smile, and you did. You gave me back my life." Thomas got to his feet, careful not to disturb Samuel, who was now chewing on a cloth toy. He crossed to Evelyn and took her in his arms. "You saved yourself, sweetheart. I just showed up and loved you while you did the hard work of healing. You are the strongest person I know. I am strong because you gave me a reason to be. You and Samuel." She looked up at him, this man who had kept every promise he had ever made to her. "I want more of this. More children, more years, more life with you. I want to grow old together, exactly like you said we would that first night I woke up afraid. Then, that is what we will do." Thomas kissed her thoroughly, and Samuel made a gurgling sound of baby protest at being ignored. They broke apart laughing, and Thomas scooped up their son. "All right, little man, we hear you. You are the most important person in this room." "Second most important," Evelyn corrected, running her hand over Samuel's soft hair. "After your father." The years that followed were full and rich. Evelyn and Thomas had 2 more children, a daughter named Clara who arrived 2 years after Samuel, and another son, James, 2 years after that. The rooms above the store became cramped with the growing family, and Thomas saved every penny he could, working extra hours at the ranch and taking on breaking horses for additional income. "I want to buy us a house," he told Evelyn one night after the children were asleep. "A real house with a yard where the children can play, maybe even a few acres so I can keep my own horses." "That sounds wonderful," Evelyn said, "but it sounds expensive. I have been saving for 3 years. Mr. Patterson is selling off some of his land, parcels near the river. I talked to him about purchasing 5 acres with a house already on it. It needs work, but the structure is sound. I can fix it up, make it into something special for us." "How much do you have saved?" Evelyn asked, and when Thomas told her, her eyes widened. "That is a substantial amount." "I have been serious about this. I want our children to have a real home, not just rooms above a store. I want you to have a kitchen big enough to move around in, and a garden, and a place that is truly ours." His expression was earnest, hopeful. Evelyn thought of the money she had saved from the store, profits she had carefully hoarded over the years. Combined with Thomas's savings, they might have enough for the down payment and repairs. "I have some money too, from the store. I was saving it for emergencies, but this feels like the right use for it. A home for our family." They purchased the land and house in the spring of 1883 and spent the summer making it livable. Thomas repaired the roof, replaced rotted boards, and repainted the entire exterior a cheerful white. Evelyn cleaned inside, scrubbing years of neglect from the floors and walls. Friends and neighbors came to help, and the house slowly transformed into a home. Samuel, now 3 years old, helped by handing his father nails and carrying small tools around. Clara toddled after her mother, chattering in her baby language, and James, still an infant, watched everything from a basket in the shade. The day they moved in, Thomas carried Evelyn over the threshold despite her protests that she was too heavy. "You are my wife, and this is our home. We are doing this properly." He set her down in the front room, large and open with windows facing the river. The children tumbled in behind them, excited and loud, and Thomas pulled Evelyn against his side. "What do you think?" "I think it is perfect. I think we are blessed beyond measure." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you remember when you told me you wanted to build something that lasts?" "I remember. You did it. This house, our children, our life together. You built something permanent and beautiful. You built us." Thomas kissed her, deep and sweet, and Samuel made gagging sounds that sent Clara into giggles. "You are both silly," Thomas told his children, but his eyes were bright with love. They threw a party to celebrate the house, inviting everyone they knew. Tables were set up outside under the trees, and food appeared in abundance. People danced to fiddle music, children ran wild in the growing darkness, and Evelyn stood with Thomas on their new porch watching it all. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," she replied, and it was true. The woman who had forgotten how to smile, who had told a persistent cowboy that her joy was lost forever, was now surrounded by laughter and love. She smiled constantly these days, at her children, at her husband, at the simple beauty of her life. The general store remained hers, but she hired a manager to run it most days, allowing her to stay home with the children more often. Thomas continued to work at the Patterson Ranch, but he also built up a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the region. People brought him difficult animals, and he worked with them patiently until they were gentle and reliable. He taught Samuel to ride before the boy was 5, and Clara demanded lessons too, refusing to be left out. "She is fearless," Thomas told Evelyn after Clara rode a pony by herself for the first time. "I have no idea where she gets that from." "From me," Evelyn said. "I may not have always been brave, but our daughter does not need to know that. Let her think her mother was fearless all along." "You were fearless," Thomas insisted. "You faced down terrible loss and survived. You let yourself love again when it would have been easier to stay closed off. You are the bravest person I know, Evelyn Vaughn." She kissed him for that, long and lingering, until Clara shouted that they were being embarrassing. The years passed in a blur of ordinary moments that added up to an extraordinary life. Samuel grew tall and serious, with a love of books that meant he spent hours reading everything he could find. Clara was wild and bright, always getting into some kind of mischief, always laughing. James was quiet and thoughtful, content to spend hours watching insects or birds, fascinated by the natural world. They were all so different, but they were all loved fiercely by both parents. When Evelyn turned 33, Thomas threw her a surprise party. She came home from the store to find the house full of people, streamers hung from the ceiling, and a cake on the table. She stood in the doorway, overwhelmed, and Thomas appeared at her side. "You deserve to be celebrated," he said simply. "I do not need all this," she protested, but she was smiling. "Maybe not, but I need to give it to you. I need everyone to know how much I love you, how grateful I am for every day we have together." He took her hand and raised his voice so the room could hear. 15 years ago, I met a woman who had forgotten how to smile. She told me she was broken, that happiness was not possible for her anymore, and I made it my mission to prove her wrong. The room had gone quiet, everyone listening. Evelyn's cheeks flushed, but she did not look away from Thomas's face. I am standing here today to tell you all that I succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Evelyn did not just learn to smile again. She learned to laugh, to love, to embrace life with both hands. She gave me 3 beautiful children and a home filled with joy. She is my partner, my best friend, my everything. His voice grew husky with emotion. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy who walked into your store and fell in love at first sight. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, and she threw her arms around his neck. I love you so much. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for being stubborn and persistent and wonderful. Always, he promised, and kissed her in front of everyone. The party was loud and long, and Evelyn enjoyed every minute of it. She danced with Thomas, with her children, with friends who had become like family. She ate cake and laughed at jokes and felt surrounded by love. When everyone finally left and the children were in bed, she and Thomas sat on the porch in the cool night air. I have been thinking, Evelyn said slowly, about the store, about selling it. Thomas turned to look at her, surprised. You love that store, your father built it. I do love it. But it ties me to town most days, and I want more time here with the children, with you. They are growing up so fast, and I do not want to miss it. She took his hand. I think it is time to let go of the past, the last piece of it I have been holding on to. The store was my connection to my family, but you and the children are my family now. I want to focus on the present, not the past. If you are sure, I support you, but only if you are truly sure. Thomas squeezed her hand. You have worked so hard to keep that place running. I am sure. It feels right, like the final step in moving forward. I think my father would understand. He would want me to be happy, and I am happiest here with all of you. She sold the store 2 months later to a young couple just starting out, and she felt nothing but peace about the decision. The money from the sale went into savings for the children's futures and improvements on the house. Thomas built onto the house, adding another bedroom and expanding the kitchen like he had promised. Evelyn planted an extensive garden, and she spent her days cooking, sewing, reading to the children, and working alongside Thomas with the horses. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, illnesses that scared them, arguments that needed resolving. But they faced everything together, and the foundation they had built was strong enough to weather any storm. Thomas kept his promise to grow old with her, his dark hair gradually showing silver at the temples, lines appearing around his eyes from years of smiling. Evelyn grew older too, her chestnut hair gaining threads of white, her hands showing the work she had done. But when Thomas looked at her, his eyes still held the same love and wonder they had when he first walked into her store. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Thomas took her back to the spot by the river where he had first kissed her. The children were old enough to stay home alone for an evening, though Samuel, now 19, promised to keep his siblings in line. Thomas had packed a picnic, and they sat on a blanket watching the sun set over the water. 20 years, Evelyn said softly. It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. Best 20 years of my life, Thomas replied, and I look forward to 20 more and 20 after that. We will be ancient, Evelyn laughed. Then we will be ancient together. He pulled a small box from his pocket. I got you something. Inside was a delicate gold locket. Evelyn opened it to find tiny photographs of their 3 children on one side and a picture of her and Thomas on their wedding day on the other. So you can carry us all with you always, Thomas said. Though I hope you know you carry us in your heart anyway. I do. All of you always. She fastened the locket around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle against her heart. You gave me everything, Thomas. A family, a home, a reason to live fully instead of just existing. You taught me that loss does not have to be the end, that joy can come after grief. We gave each other everything, he corrected, echoing her words from years ago. I was drifting before I met you, never settling, never committing. You gave me a purpose, a place to belong. You made me a better man. They lay back on the blanket as stars began to appear, hands clasped between them. Evelyn thought about the young woman she had been, so lost in grief she could not imagine ever being happy again. That woman would not believe this life if she could see it, would not believe that the stern cowboy who asked why she never smiled would become the center of her entire world. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, always attuned to her moods. "About smiling," she said. "About how you told me you would remind me how, and I thought you were ridiculous. I thought happiness was lost to me forever. And now I cannot remember the last time I went a whole day without smiling. You kept your promise, Thomas Vaughn. You reminded me, and then you gave me so many reasons that I could never forget again." He rolled onto his side to face her, his expression tender in the fading light. "That was always the plan. Make you so happy you could never go back to that sad place." "Mission accomplished," she whispered, and kissed him under the emerging stars. The years continued to unfold, each one adding new layers to their life together. Samuel went to university in San Francisco to study law, fulfilling the dream that had died with Evelyn's brother. Clara married a rancher and settled 20 miles away, close enough to visit often with her own growing family. James became a teacher at the local school, patient and kind with his students. Each of their children found their own paths, but they all remained close, gathering for holidays and Sunday dinners, filling the house with noise and love. Thomas and Evelyn became grandparents, and they welcomed each new baby with the same wonder they had felt holding their own children. They taught their grandchildren to ride horses, to skip stones, to appreciate wildflowers. They told stories of the old days, of how Grandma had run a general store and Grandpa had been a cowboy, of how they had met and fallen in love. "Did you really not smile at all before Grandpa?" One granddaughter asked Evelyn during a visit. Evelyn, now in her 50s with gray streaking her hair, smiled at the question. "I had forgotten how, sweetheart. I was very sad for a long time, but your grandfather reminded me and I have been smiling ever since." "That is so romantic," the girl sighed, and Evelyn caught Thomas's eye across the room. He winked at her, and she felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt 25 years ago. On a warm summer evening in 1903, Evelyn and Thomas sat on their porch watching the sun set, as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 70s now, moving slower, aching in various places, but still together, still in love. "You have any regrets?" Thomas asked her suddenly. Evelyn considered the question carefully. "I regret the years I wasted being sad, but I do not regret anything that happened after you walked into my store. Every moment with you has been a gift, even when I am stubborn and difficult," he teased. "Especially then, because it means you care enough to be stubborn and difficult." She took his weathered hand in hers. "You gave me a beautiful life, Thomas. 3 children, 7 grandchildren so far, and decades of happiness. You kept every promise you ever made to me." "There is one more promise I intend to keep," he said seriously. "What is that?" "That I will love you until my last breath, and if there is anything beyond this life, I will love you there too. You are mine, Evelyn Vaughn, and I am yours forever." She leaned her head against his shoulder, content and at peace. The woman who had forgotten how to smile had been lost somewhere in the past, replaced by this version of herself who smiled easily, loved deeply, and lived fully. Thomas had made it his mission to remind her how to smile, and in doing so, he had given her back herself. "Forever," she agreed softly. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they sat together in the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created, and smiled. Years later, when their children gathered to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, Samuel stood to give a toast. The house was full of family. 3 generations gathered to honor the love that had started it all. "To my parents," Samuel said, raising his glass. "Dad, you once told me that when you met Mom, she said she had forgotten how to smile. You made it your mission to remind her. Looking at her now, I think we can all agree you succeeded spectacularly. But more than that, you built a family, a legacy of love that all of us carry forward. You taught us what commitment looks like, what partnership means, how to weather storms and celebrate joys. Thank you for being the best parents anyone could ask for, and for showing us that true love is not just real, it is the most important thing in the world." Everyone raised their glasses, and Evelyn, tears streaming down her face, looked at Thomas. He was crying too, unashamed, and they held each other while their family celebrated around them. 50 years, Evelyn whispered. "You promised me 50 years, and here we are." "Here we are," Thomas agreed. "And I am not done yet. I intend to keep going as long as you will have me." "Always," she promised. "Forever and always." They danced that night, slow and careful with age, but the love between them was as strong as it had been when they were young. Their children and grandchildren watched with soft expressions, seeing in their grandparents the kind of love everyone hopes to find. The kind of love that endures, that survives loss and hardship, that grows stronger with each passing year. When the party finally wound down and everyone had gone home, Thomas and Evelyn sat once more on their porch. The night was clear, stars bright overhead, and a warm breeze carried the scent of roses from Evelyn's garden. "It has been a good life," Thomas said quietly. "The best life," Evelyn corrected. "Thank you for not giving up on that sad woman in the general store. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. You were always worth saving. You just needed someone to show you." He kissed her forehead, a gesture as familiar now as breathing. "I love you, Evelyn. Today, tomorrow, and every day after. I love you too, more than words could ever express." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had become one through years of shared life, and Evelyn reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here. From the depths of grief to the heights of joy, from a woman who had forgotten how to smile to a woman who smiled every single day. Thomas had given her that. His persistence, his patience, his unwavering love had pulled her back from the edge and given her a reason to live again. But more than that, he had given her a home. Not just the house they sat in, beautiful as it was, but a home in his heart, a place where she belonged completely. Their children had grown that home, expanded it, and now their grandchildren added even more rooms. The Sullivan family plot on the hill still held 3 graves, and Evelyn still visited them sometimes, but she no longer felt the crushing weight of loss when she did. She had new family now, living family, and she carried the love of those who had died alongside the love of those who remained. As she sat with her husband under the stars, Evelyn smiled, truly and deeply happy. The cowboy who had walked into her store 45 years ago had made it his mission to remind her how to smile, and he had succeeded beyond either of their wildest dreams. He had not just reminded her. He had given her a lifetime of reasons, an endless supply of joy that grew with each passing day. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all. Not just love, though that was precious. Not just family, though that was irreplaceable, but the gift of knowing that even after tremendous loss, happiness was possible. That broken hearts could mend. That women who forgot how to smile could learn again, could laugh again, could love again. Thomas had taught her all of that, simply by being stubborn enough to see past her grief to the woman underneath, and patient enough to wait while she healed. He had promised to take care of her, and he had done exactly that for 50 years. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, they finally stood to go inside. Thomas offered his arm, and Evelyn took it, just as she had that first evening he took her to dinner. They walked into their home together, past photographs of children and grandchildren, past mementos of a life fully lived, to the bedroom they had shared for 5 decades. Before they slept, Evelyn turned to Thomas one last time. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what? For everything. For choosing me, for staying, for loving me even when I could not love myself, for reminding me how to smile." Thomas pulled her close, his arms still strong despite his age. "It was the easiest mission I ever undertook because you were worth every moment of effort. Sleep now, my love. Tomorrow we will wake up together and have another day, another chance to smile, another opportunity to love each other." Evelyn closed her eyes, safe in his embrace, and smiled as she drifted off to sleep. In her dreams, she was young again, standing in her father's store, watching a dusty cowboy walk through the door. And when he asked why she never smiled instead of telling him she had forgotten, she simply smiled at him, because somehow she already knew that this man would change her life forever. The story of Evelyn Sullivan and Thomas Vaughn became a treasured tale passed down through generations of their family. Their descendants told it to their own children, about the woman who forgot how to smile and the cowboy who made it his mission to remind her. They told of steadfast love, of patience and persistence, of two people who found each other in the dusty streets of a California town and built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. And in the telling, the story became more than just history. It became a promise, a reminder that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that happiness could follow grief, that it was never too late to learn to smile again. Thomas and Evelyn had proven that, not just in words but in the life they built together, brick by brick, day by day, smile by smile, until they had created something beautiful and enduring. Their home still stood by the river, occupied now by their great-grandchildren, the rooms filled with new laughter and new love. The Patterson Ranch had long since been sold and subdivided, but people still told stories of Thomas Vaughn, one of the best horsemen California had ever seen. The general store where they met was now a restaurant, but locals remembered its history, the Sullivan family that had run it for decades. But more than places or buildings, Thomas and Evelyn left behind something more valuable, a legacy of love, proof that even in the hardest times, hope could bloom like wildflowers in the dust. They had lived and loved through joy and sorrow, through ordinary days and extraordinary moments, and they had done it together. And when they finally passed, years later, within days of each other, as if neither could bear to be apart for long, they were buried together under an oak tree, a spot they had chosen themselves years before. The headstone was simple, bearing their names, the dates of their long lives, and a single line underneath. He taught her to smile again. It was enough. It was everything. And their family, gathered around the graves with tears and smiles both, knew that somewhere, somehow, Thomas and Evelyn were together still. His arms around her, her head on his shoulder, both of them smiling as they had every day of their beautiful, miraculous life together.